In this video, we'll be looking at section 2.4, Graphical Misrepresentations of Data. So Mark Twain once said there are three kinds of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. It's been said that data can be manipulated to support any position. I don't know if I would go as far as to say any position, but we can certainly manipulate the data. And it's certainly been done many times. One method of distorting the truth is through graphics. And so we're going to look at some examples here and then just some guidelines and things to look out for. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, oops, I'm going to have to move this down a little bit. Here's example 1. And so you look at the bars here and you're like, wow, massive increase in home price. Yeah, the bar would indicate that that's true. But if you actually look at the scale, notice this one's about 80,000 and it's gone up to 82,000. That's not reflected by the bar. It's like 3 times bigger or more. And so the bar size can be misleading. And I would just say here the scale is the problem. Because notice it doesn't start at 0. So to fix this graph, or at least so a little bit of attempt to be honest in what it's trying to represent, is to start it at 0 and you'll go up just a little bit, and then a mark goes this way and a mark goes this way, and then you go back. And that just indicates that you're not starting at 0. But I'm going to say the person who made this graph wasn't really interested in being completely honest with us. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So 2.4, graphical misrepresentations of data. So this is example 2. So here's a really good example where we're just looking at the scale here. The scale is the issue, because notice here when you look at interest rates, it starts at 3.14% and goes up to 3.145%. That's not a really huge difference, but yet the graph would seem to indicate that it is really increasing greatly. So if you're trying to make people think that the interest rates are really rising, then you might use a graph like this, but it's certainly misleading. Whereas if you use this one here that starts at 0, you can see it's pretty negligible as far as the increase. And interest rates can rise and fall and fluctuate. So anyway, this is another good example of where the scale is an issue. And that seems to be one of our most common situations. So here we have another example, and again, notice the scale is the issue. This is actually what we call a line graph. And so far we haven't really mentioned those. I don't know, you may have seen one in the homework. You've probably seen them before. But line graphs help us to see trends. Instead of having bars all along here like we've been doing with our bar graphs or our histograms, they're just using dots. And anyway, you can see because the scale here started at 30, it really looks like the percentage of women in terms of college students is really increasing here. But if you actually look at when the scale starts at 0, you can see that it's an incline, but it actually went down here. And so it is steadily, I should say the trend is it's definitely rising. But it's not rising like this graph would tend to suggest. All right, let's move on to a couple more examples. And by the way, you'll see a lot of variety in terms of graphs that are misrepresentations of data. So here's a good example. The cost of gas, this was last week. Thankfully, we're not that expensive right now. And this is the current week. And then notice the graph, or basically these are our bins. And it really should be done on a weekly scale. Notice this is last year, so it's very vague. We don't know if that's like the average last year. We don't know if it's a certain, like maybe that was the low. We do know that the gas prices fluctuated a lot that year, just like they always do. And so in that way, it's very misleading. So basically, the bins are not the same size. We're not just looking at weekly averages. This is a lot more broad, or at least it's vague. We don't know. All right, let's move on to the next example. So here it says a home security company located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, develops a summer and campaign with the slogan, "When you leave for vacation, burglars leave for work." Great slogan for a home security company. According to the city of Minneapolis, roughly 20% of home burglaries occur during the peak vacation months of July and August. The rest of the year, about 8%. That's when 8% of them occur, and 20% occur in July and August. So it's more than doubled in July and August, or at least that's what the graph would indicate. And this is what I would be showing if I'm trying to get people to buy some home security systems, and I'm guessing that's what they're doing. But you can see if you actually look at it by month, as far as the percent of the burglaries throughout the year, you can see that really it is high in July, but in August it's actually lower than it is in September and October. In fact, you can see in this part of the graph here, burglaries tend to be higher in the second half of the year. So again, certainly, even at their peak, they're not double what's going on in the other months. And so again, that's a very misleading graph. So that's my last example. Let's go ahead and look at some common misrepresentations of data. So an inconsistent scale, or one that causes confusion, it's not clear, not beginning the axis at 0, that seems to be pretty common. We didn't really look at one, but 3D graphics can really distort sizes, especially for the parts that are closer to you as compared to the ones that are farther away. It's always better, for example, with like a circle graph, to use a two-dimensional figure, and your percentages should represent each region correctly. And then classes that have different widths, we know that that's an issue as well. They should always be the same width. And last of all, I want to just offer some guidelines for creating good graphs. You always want to title them and label them and the axes clearly. Avoid distortions, never lie. Well, you know, that's one of those ones where hopefully you're not the one that's doing the distorting or the lying, but we certainly will see that out there where things are distorted. Start the scales at 0, let the class widths be the same size. Avoid three-dimensional graphics. They tend to be misleading. Do not use more than one design in the same graph. Again, we didn't really look at one like that, but graphs can get confusing. And finally, bars or pie sectors should be proportional to percentages. And so, all right, that's going to be it for this lesson.